Every airline has its network. For some, it's small and familiar. The same handful of cities coming around again and again until you know the hotel corridors by heart and can find a decent coffee without even thinking about it. For others, it stretches across the globe, a long, ever-changing list of destinations where there are still places on the schedule you might never touch, no matter how many years you've been flying. And then there are the exceptional ones. The ad hoc charters that appear out of nowhere, or the maintenance runs to cities that were never meant to be layovers at all. Places that don't sit neatly alongside the usual mix of beaches and business hubs. And the thing is, when you land somewhere unfamiliar, you don't just lose your bearings, you also lose your instincts. The little things you rely on without even realising. The knowledge of which streets to avoid, which taxis to trust, when to turn back and when to carry on. And if you don't know those things, how do you spot when something isn't quite right? How do you keep yourself safe when you don't even know what the risks are? Today's story comes from a crew member who, looking back, wishes he'd made a very different decision on a layover like that. A place he didn't know, a city he didn't understand, and a night out he chose to take on his own. He was lucky. He got to come home and tell the story himself. But not everybody does. While this episode was being written, an American crew member, Fernando Gutierrez, was reported missing after a night out in Medellin. He'd gone to a nightclub with a fellow crew member who apparently returned to the hotel early and left him, happy and enjoying himself with two locals. Fernando never made it home from that trip. So, if you're a crew member or a traveller out exploring the world and you're listening to this, consider this your quiet reminder. Take that extra moment. Make that extra plan. Think twice before heading out alone in a place that you don't fully understand. Because while the destination can look safe enough on the surface, you never really know what's waiting underneath all of that, do you?
Doors to armed and cross-check.
Come fly the red eye.
Welcome aboard the Red Eye.
A bedroom in Brighton. Hello?
Hi Elliot, it's crewing. We need you for the Manila today, 12:35 check-in.
Elliot dragged his hand down his face and shook his head, trying to wake himself up. He'd been up already this morning, even packed a case so that he was ready to leave and make the airport in 2 hours if necessary, and then, like an idiot, he'd fallen back to sleep. A deep one. What had she said? I'm sorry, can you say that again?
We need you for the Manila. Checks in at 10:35. 2 nights there and back on Sunday.
Manila? He circled the word around his tired brain, trying to find where it fit. It sounded kind of familiar, but not in the way that it should have. Manila. Huh. She must have sensed his confusion.
It's a ferry flight for maintenance.
She added helpfully. Oh, Elliot frowned, still thinking. What did that mean? What country was that? Manila in Italy? He asked after a moment. There was a pause before she answered. Her voice lifted with amusement.
No, not that Manila, Elliot. Manila in the Philippines.
Elliot held the phone away from his ear and looked at it for a second as his brain began to wake up. Manila? In the Philippines? The Far East? Ah, his favourite part of the world. And a ferry flight. That meant no passengers. And 2 nights to explore when he got there. A smile crept onto his face. The standby gods had spoken, and, now that he understood what they meant, he was liking what they had to say. Oh, he liked it a lot. Oh, amazing, thank you. I'm on my way, he said, hanging up the call as he swung his legs out of the bed. Manila, let's be having you. At that particular moment, Elliot felt like the luckiest crew member in the entire airline. The flight itself had already been a gift. No passengers, no service, no dramas. Between him and one other crew member, all they needed to do was the hourly walk around the plane to check that everything was behaving itself, nothing was on fire, and then either slip back into a seat with a film on and their feet up, or take a few hours in the bunk. It was as close as aviation got to a paid day off. And now here he was, with 48 hours in a destination most of his colleagues would never even see on their roster. He'd already ticked off a meal with the others, sat out on the side of the street, watching the city roll past in its slow, chaotic rhythm. He'd watched the overloaded motorcycles weaving through the traffic, heard the music drifting out of open doorways, and felt the heat rising off the pavement, even after the sun had gone down. And he still had 2 full days of exploring ahead of him before he had to think about taking an empty aircraft home again. And then there was the hotel, right in the centre of town. It wasn't like any of the usual chain hotels he stayed in. It was more authentic, so they say. A faded charm of something that had once been luxury. A bustling hub full of a mix of Asians and Westerners in equal numbers. And it had an enormous casino slap bang in the middle, which was where he had found himself at just past 9 p.m. Elliot liked casinos. He always enjoyed a layover in Vegas and a few hours at the roulette wheel. But unlike Vegas, where he could lose all of his allowances in 1 hour, here the odds were surprisingly stacked in his favour. Or at least they were so far. The wheels spun again. The ball rattled, bounced and danced across the numbers before finally coming to a halt, settling on black. Elliot blinked as the croupier calmly doubled his pile and slid the chips back towards him with practiced ease. He let out a quiet breath through his nose, almost laughing to himself. He literally couldn't lose. It was actually starting to feel ridiculous. Even so, there was that small voice at the back of his mind, the one that always turned up eventually, reminding him that luck had a habit of disappearing just as quickly as it arrived. He placed one more bet, then leaned back slightly, letting his eyes drift around the room while the wheels spun again. The air was thick with smoke inside. Cigars and cigarettes as commonplace on people as wristwatches. Smoke curling up toward the ceiling above the tables. Dotted amongst the locals, there was a definite demographic of traveller, he mused. Older Western men walking around unashamedly with young local women on their arms, or trailing just a step behind. And he found himself wondering if his pilots had all really gone to bed early like they said they had. A cheer went up, pulling his attention back to the table, and he watched as the ball bounced and dropped into place on black once again. But this time his chips were on red, and he gave an accepting smile as his chips were raked away. His luck had finally run out, and so too, he realised as he stood up and flipped open his pack of Marlboros, had his cigarettes. He wouldn't go far, he told himself. Just a quick wander, stretch his legs and see a bit more of the place. He stepped out into the night air and immediately had to sidestep a moped that had come skimming past him. 2 young lads balanced on it like it was perfectly normal. No helmets, no hesitation, just weaving through pedestrians as if they were part of the traffic system. He let out a quiet laugh, watching them disappear into the stream of people. It was chaos, and he loved it already. Up and down the street, neon signs were stacked one on top of each other, and none of them meant anything to him. Nothing was in English. He stood thoughtfully for a moment, his hands in his pockets. He'd won probably 300 quid in the casino, a lot of money here, and the first thing he needed to do was buy some cigarettes with it, and after that, maybe a cold beer, and somewhere to sit and watch the world go by. Simple enough in theory. He glanced up and down the road, wondering which of the neon signs might actually be a shop. "You look for something?" The voice was close, and he turned, looking down to see a small man standing beside him. No more than mid-20s, maybe 5'2", smiling up at him eagerly with uneven, tar-stained teeth. Elliot smiled back. "Yes, pal. Where can I buy some cigarettes from round here?" He showed him the empty packet for translation. "Here, I show you." A hand landed lightly on Elliot's shoulder and guided him forward, passing the next building and the one after that until they stopped in front of a small shop. "In here," he said. "Thanks, buddy," Elliot said, adding a deliberate "good night" as he stepped inside. He knew enough about this part of the world to recognise the setup. Help rarely came without an expectation attached, especially at this time of the night. And sure enough, when he came back out with a fresh pack in his hand, the man was still there, waiting. Elliot peeled the cellophane back, flipped the top, and offered him a cigarette. He took it without hesitation and tucked it neatly behind his ear. Elliot lit one for himself and took a long drag, buying himself a second to think about how to end this politely before it turned into something more complicated. "Cheers for that," he said eventually, giving him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "I don't suppose you can point me towards a bar?" "I show you," came the reply. And just like that, the hand was back on his shoulder, gently but firmly steering him further down the street. In hindsight, that was the moment he should have called it. A polite nod, a quick thanks, and then straight back to the hotel. But Elliot wasn't wired like that. He wasn't the kind of person who shut things down bluntly, and when the man offered to show him a bar, he found himself nodding along before he properly decided whether he actually wanted the help or not. And so they walked, side by side, in a slightly awkward silence, broken only by the occasional half-formed sentence that didn't quite land. The man's English was limited, but that didn't seem to matter. Every time Elliot glanced over, he was met with the same wide grin, as if the two of them were already firmly established as friends on a night out together. Which, apparently, meant they were now going to a bar together. Elliot felt a quiet groan build in his chest as they carried on down the street. It had that familiar feeling to it, like being clocked as a tourist in a market and gently but persistently guided towards something you hadn't asked for and definitely didn't want. He could almost see it playing out. A drink, and then another, a favour, a request, something for sale, something he'd have to politely refuse while trying not to offend someone who clearly wasn't planning to go anywhere anytime soon. His mind ticked through the possibilities as they walked, each one slightly more awkward than the last. Then they turned a corner and a row of bars opened up in front of them, lights spilling out onto the street, voices, music in the air. Elliot felt the shift immediately, relieved that there were others here. There was safety in numbers, right? This was his moment, he thought as he walked into the first bar they reached, followed closely by his friend. He stepped up to the bar and ordered a beer, pulling a single note from his pocket. He could feel the man beside him, still there, still expectant, but Elliot didn't look at him. He took the beer, turned and gave a quick nod over his shoulder. "Good night, then. Thanks for your help." And with that, he walked away, heading straight for a booth by the window, not giving him the chance to follow or respond, or turn this into anything more than it needed to be. He breathed a sigh of relief as he sat down that he hadn't been followed. And then he glanced up. He was still there, perched on a stool, just watching him. And his face had changed. All the fake friendliness seemed to have gone, replaced with something harder that didn't shift. Elliot held his gaze for a second longer than he meant to, and then turned back to the window, picking up his beer and taking a longer drink than he probably needed. It's nothing, he told himself. Still. He tried to settle himself, focusing on the street outside. People passing by, taxis pulling up, the low hum of music and conversation around him, all normal things, safe things. But every now and then, without meaning to, his eyes flicked back toward the bar. And every time, the man was still looking at him. Not moving, not distracted, just there. And it was starting to get under his skin. Elliot drained the rest of his beer, set the empty bottle down, and stood up a little too quickly. He kept his eyes firmly away from the bar as he headed for the door, stepping out onto the street and crossing straight over to the place he'd spotted earlier. Another bar, this one brighter, busier. He pushed through the door and slipped inside, moving quickly. "Oh, you're being ridiculous," he told himself, forcing a small smile as he shook his head. It was just the place. The unfamiliarity, that was all. Different country, different city, different rules. It threw you off for a bit. And that was normal. He'd felt it before, hadn't he? Hong Kong, Shanghai, he'd gone out on his own there plenty of times. But had he felt this unsettled the first time? He tried to remember. "A beer, please," he said as the barman appeared in front of him. And then he felt it. Before he even saw him, he knew that he was right there, right by his side, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He didn't say anything, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge him at all. He just raised a hand slightly and ordered his own beer. And something about him had changed. Completely. "You pay me for helping you," he demanded, jutting out his chin, challenging him to refuse. Elliot paused, beer in hand, weighing it up. He could just pay. Keep things simple, keep the peace. But the longer he stood there, the more that didn't sit right with him. Yes, the man had shown him the shop, but he hadn't asked him to. And he certainly hadn't agreed to buy him anything in return. So why did he owe him? Elliot straightened slightly, squaring his shoulders. "Sorry, no," he said, flat and final. The man's expression hardened instantly, and he saw a flicker of something behind the eyes that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and Elliot had just chosen not to see it. "I'm going to the bathroom. Good night," Elliot added quickly, already stepping away, not waiting for a response. He moved through the bar, turned the corner, and found the exit. Without breaking stride, he pushed straight through and out onto the street, the door swinging shut behind him as he kept walking, not daring to look back until he'd put a decent bit of distance between them. Finally. The heat hit him again, immediately, thick and heavy, wrapping around him as he turned another corner. He glanced up and spotted the hotel sign a few blocks down, glowing faintly above the street, and he felt a small wave of relief. As he walked, he could feel his shirt sticking to his back, the humidity clinging to him even this late in the evening. How is it still this hot at 10 o'clock at night? The city, though, it showed no signs of slowing down. The streets were still busy, shops still open, families out strolling as if it were the middle of the afternoon. Traffic rolled steadily past in both directions, 3 lanes each way, headlights stretching off into the distance. It all just felt normal. Not that he knew what normal was here. Elliot took out another cigarette and lit it, the flame flaring briefly in the humid night air. He scanned the street for the 7-Eleven sign. He needed water more than anything. And then he stopped short. Someone was standing directly in front of him. He shifted to step around, eyes dropping, and then saw a face that he recognized immediately. His stomach flipped. In the man's hand was a gun, and it was aimed straight at Elliot's chest. Time seemed to freeze. The crowd kept moving around them. Cars rolled by, but none of it registered. It was just the two of them, locked in a moment that didn't feel real. Elliot felt the blood drain from his face, as if he'd already been shot. Surely not. Surely you don't get shot for refusing to buy someone a drink. But what did he know about this place? Nothing. That was all. "Give me money," the man spat, eyebrows drawn together, eyes dark and angry. Strangely, Elliot didn't feel fear. Not exactly, anyway. He felt numb, disconnected, like he was watching someone else's scene. "I don't have any," Elliot said, trying to move past him. The gun barrel jabbed into his chest, stopping him cold. "You do. I saw you in the casino." And just like that, it clicked. He'd been followed. The man hadn't just appeared outside the hotel by chance. He hadn't just been a helpful local. He'd been watching him from the start. At the casino, at the chip counter, all the way here. The barrel pressed into Elliot's pocket, the one where he'd stashed his winnings. The world spun. The noise of the street suddenly muffled. Sweat trickled down his forehead, stinging his eyes. "Money. Now." Elliot reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the folded notes, his eyes never leaving the man's. Was he really going to hand it over? Now, our donor told us that he still doesn't know what possessed him to do what he did next. He reached into his pocket, grabbed the notes, and without thinking, hurled the entire wad straight into the 6 lanes of traffic. They scattered like confetti under headlights, and as the cash flew, he heard his own voice, sharp and loud. "God will strike you down for this." And then he ran, straight into the traffic, weaving through horns and headlights, darting across all 6 chaotic lanes until he burst into the barbershop opposite. The man gave chase. Inside, Elliot stumbled over the words, trying to make sense of them as they left his mouth. He has a gun!" he shouted, scanning the room for somewhere, anywhere to hide. The shop was busy, and 4 or 5 barbers in black t-shirts and trousers stepped forward as one. They looked like a wall of calm resolve, and Elliot could only stare as the gunman charged toward them, just as one barber quietly turned the lock on the door. "It's okay," one of them told him, steady and sure. But it didn't feel okay. Not when the man came back. This time, he wasn't alone. He hammered the glass door with the butt of the gun, each strike louder than the last until the glass gave way. Elliot could hear a siren somewhere in the distance, and he prayed it was heading their way. Would it arrive in time? Elliot stepped back, heart pounding, but the barbers didn't flinch. As the gunman crashed through the door, they moved together, 4 against 1, catching him mid-stride, hoisting him up and tossing him out onto the pavement. He landed hard, rolling across the concrete, an angry, tangled mess of limbs. And then the police car pulled up. The siren cut through the noise, lights flashing, and the man bolted, disappearing into the night. Elliot barely had time to process it before someone was ushering him back to the hotel. His heart still racing, his mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. For Elliot, the story of that night in Manila had become something he's told more times than he can count. But the part that stayed with him, the part he doesn't always talk about, came after. Because once he was back on familiar soil, the fear he'd somehow skipped over in the moment came crashing in. It didn't creep up on him. It erupted. After hearing what had happened, the airline routed him home via Hong Kong the very next day. But what happened in his head didn't clear quite so quickly. Days turned into weeks, and then months. It was as if the adrenaline of that night had left something lodged inside of him. He tried to quieten it with drink. The nights out that used to be fun became a way to numb the knot in his chest. His friends saw a guy who was acting out of character. Rumours swirled, but what they didn't see was the man who drew his curtains day and night because he was convinced someone might be watching. It took him a long time to admit that what had happened wasn't just a bad night out. It was trauma. And just because he'd walked away physically unscathed didn't mean he could simply return to who he'd been before. And while the gunman only wanted his winnings, he took something far more valuable. He took Elliot's peace of mind. And there's no price tag for that. So we thank Elliot for sharing his story. We hope that his experience and the stories of Fernando and others serves as a reminder to all of us, and especially crew. Take that extra bit of care out there. Because the world can be beautiful but unpredictable, especially when you're somewhere unfamiliar. We often carry an unearned sense of safety, not because the risk isn't there, but because we simply don't know any better. We move from city to city, country to country, applying learned routines to new places without truly knowing or understanding our surroundings. So if sharing these stories helps even one person avoid a similar fate, leads someone to make the safe choice instead of realising it in hindsight, then they were not told in vain.
The Red Eye podcast is written by Kaylee Kay, narrated and produced by me, Ali Murphy. These stories are based on true events, but certain details, characters, and timelines have been altered to protect the innocent. Visit our website, theredeyepod.com, to subscribe to our newsletter and to find out details on how you can contribute your story for us to turn into an episode. If you enjoyed listening to our stories, please like, subscribe, and review. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Red Eye podcast. You guys are why we do this. We love the stories that you have, and we love telling you the stories that people share with us. To help us reach more people and get the podcast really out there, we would really appreciate it if you left a review. It just helps our podcast be a little bit more visible. Thank you.